Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Dennis. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Now, Nick, whereabouts are you in the world today?
I'm in Singapore as of today. I came back here 2 days ago after a trip to Indonesia, and I'm off to Malaysia tomorrow.
Oh, awesome. So around that whole Southeast Asia hub, really, really cool. That's very good. Yeah. And how long have you been in Singapore for?
I lived here for about 5 years now. I started my career actually overseas in Australia on the Gold Coast in '98, studying overseas, and then I was working there. It was hard to leave the place, but I ended up in Southeast Asia since 2004, and that's where I've been working for various big international advertising and communication firms.
Oh, yeah, cool. So tell us a little bit more about your background. I've given the listeners a quick introduction to you, but tell us more about you.
Yeah, so I was born in Sweden, but I wanted to spread my wings a little bit, and being a little bit resentful against the system and my parents, I wanted to rebel. So I looked at a map and I saw Australia was as far away as I could get, or even actually New Zealand would have been even a step further. But I ended up in Australia. Then that's where I studied and played golf, enjoyed myself. But then I really needed to also get into the working life, and I got a job in Bangkok with an advertising company, and I spent about 15 years in various jobs in Southeast Asia, working my way up to become a general manager, general director, taking on some quite big leadership roles.
Yeah, very good. Now, we'll get into those leadership roles and all that in a minute, but I see that you're an international best-selling author, and the book is Executive Loneliness, The 5 Pathways to Overcoming Isolation, Stress, Anxiety, and Depression in the Modern Business World. And listeners, I know that some of you are actually probably thinking, oh, that's something I want to read as well. So yeah, very good. So Nick, that's good. And congratulations on being a #1 best-selling author. That's fantastic.
Thank you. And the book also came out of inspiration. I went through a personal challenging time when I divorced. I resigned from a job. And with that, I found myself basically quite lonely. I was a bit lost. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do in my life. And most of us go through these times. And no surprise, it came to me in my early 40s. And I could realize when I went through this phase that it could have gone worse. I lost my fitness, I lost my health, and my regular exercise after work instead turned into going to the bar and have drinks. And while that might have been innocent from the beginning, it became a bad habit. And I basically had 2-3 years when I was jumping from job to job before I found myself again. And at the end of my journey, when I was coming back on, there was a friend of mine who didn't make it through, a friend who sadly died of suicide. And that's inspired me to look into this topic, surveyed the senior executives working under pressure, and also then to interview a lot of executives working, especially based in Southeast Asia, in all those regional jobs, which are quite stressful. And that is what I put in the book. So it's my journey, and hopefully shedding some positive light in how to get out of when we find ourselves in a challenging gap.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to come back to those interviews in a minute because I think it's really important for us to have a little bit more of a chat about that. Now, tell me, the change, what do you like with change? Do you like change, and how do you handle it?
Well, I think the natural answer to anyone who is a leader or a manager, we would say, yes, I'm addicted to change, I can handle change. But if we really take a look at ourselves, it is uncomfortable. And I think that perhaps the older we get, the more uncomfortable it is. But it is what is happening everywhere, and it's so much change, and we just have to do the best we can to go through it. And I say that you got to surround yourself with the right people when you're going through change, and maybe a coach, a mentor, or someone who can hold your hand, someone so that you can at least not to go through everything yourself.
Yeah, you don't need to do it yourself. There are others that can help you. I think, though, there are a lot of people who are a little bit afraid, or maybe there's an ego, or there's something in the way of actually putting their hand up and asking for that help. But just know, listeners, that you can ask for the help if you want to, and it's available out there for sure. Now, Nick, I'm going to come back to the interviews in a minute, but the other thing I wanted to ask or say here is that you're an Ironman top 1% world athlete. Tell us a little more about that.
Well, I do most of the things to the extreme. I have done when I studied. I wanted to be top of the class. When I worked, I wanted to get to the top, and I always been driving myself quite hard. And so a couple of years ago, I went into a gym and I had to fill in a form where they asked, what's your fitness goal? And at that time, I couldn't even run 5 kilometers. So I put down, run a marathon. And the fitness instructor looked at me in a little bit in a funny way. And then I also knew that there was a sport called triathlon, and the longest distance that is called an Ironman. So I also put down that, and that completely blew him off. So I signed up for a triathlon before I even could swim. So that's just me, Dennis, and I threw myself into it.
Oh, I love it. Before you could even swim, you signed up for a triathlon. That's putting yourself out there and really setting a goal, which is really amazing to see. Well done. Now, the interviews, let's go back to that. So I think that's really important that you've been doing these interviews with people and executives. What have been the 1, 2, or 3 top things that come up for them as they struggled for some of them? Can you just share those?
Yeah, sure. And one of the questions I asked was how they are feeling in the job as in regards to suffering from loneliness. And what I found was that about 30% of the senior executives I surveyed then in Singapore either were or have been suffering from loneliness in the workplace. I then redid this study in 2020 when we were during the pandemic and the lockdowns, and that number had doubled. So we can clearly see here that many of the executives, no surprise then, who were working from home, of course, they were going through a more challenging time. So that's perhaps one finding that we're not surprised about, Dennis. But when I then had a follow-up question to ask them, okay, if you're not feeling well mentally, is this something that you will talk to your boss, your HR, or anyone in your company about? 84% said they would not talk about this.
Wow. 84%.
Yep.
That is huge. So if they're not talking to anyone about it, well, what are they doing?
Well, another scary thing is that then another follow-up question, 75% would also not seek professional help for it. So it's the stigma here is blocking about it. So you're realizing that you're suffering, but you're not going to talk to anyone in your company about it. You're also not going to seek professional help for it. That means you're suffering in isolation. And that is due to the stigma surrounding this topic. And that is the core issue here. And that's why I wanted to push forward in writing the book about it.
I'd love to give you a little bit more insight into me. I am from Georgia, born and raised, South Georgia, small town with only 5,000 people, so they're probably still missing me today. My town, I attended university in Georgia at Clark Atlanta University, which is a historically Black college and university. My undergrad and grad degrees are in mathematics. I joined Ford directly out of school, so all 25 years have been at one company, but it doesn't feel that way because I've worked in 4 countries. So I've worked in Japan for 3 years, China for 6, Thailand for 2, and then obviously the remainder of that in the U.S. So it's been a really, really great career in that way. Personally, I'm married. I have a 9-year-old daughter. I don't recommend having children late in life because you will be tired all the time, but she is the joy of my life. And I've been married for 16 years to a wonderful man that people think because he's Vietnamese, I think I picked him up overseas, but I actually met him here in Dearborn and Regent Court at Ford. So the story isn't as crazy as some people think it would be.
Right. Oh, wow. That sounds pretty cool. Now, Ford Motor Company, that's awesome. I mean, I understand today you're the marketing general manager for electric vehicles. And so that'd be a really, really cool area to be in within the automobile industry.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area to be in at this time. I will tell you that every day I'm learning something new. I said recently to one of my team members that I was the perfect candidate for this job because I was driving around in my Expedition, which I love. But for those of you who are familiar with an Expedition, it's a really, really big SUV. And I was not convinced yet on the EV path. And then this job came along and it was interesting and exciting. And I said, let me learn more. And I am totally converted. I drive a Mustang Mach-E. I'm fascinated every day by the technology in the vehicle, by the savings and the fact that I actually haven't been to a gas station in 4 months. And I'm paying less than $50 a month for gas for charging, which is a huge savings versus what I was paying before. but more importantly, the impact that Ford Motor Company is making to the environment with zero emission vehicles and how we're changing lives even in the states of Kentucky and Tennessee by putting battery electric plants there and providing jobs to people locally. So it's just been a fascinating last 5-6 months that I've been in this role. Obviously, my career I've spent a large amount of time in product marketing and brand marketing and also in analytics. But this, I will say, has been the most fun so far in my career.
Oh, I think it's a really interesting area. And I also see from your bio too that you, from Ford Motor Company, but also you've been featured in magazines and so forth like Forbes, Fortune, Authority Magazine, and other global recognized leadership publications and podcasts. And of course, this podcast now, which is pretty good. And so I think that you're really quite keen in helping reduce the learning curve by sharing how leaders can accelerate their results and get more results going forward. And we're going to talk more about leadership a little bit later on as well. But you know what? I actually started my career in working for a Ford dealership here in New Zealand. And I understand that you've been to New Zealand before. You did some filming in Christchurch. Is that right?
I did. You've done your homework. I was actually working in China and we were filming an ad for the Mondeo. And the Mondeo was, obviously, we sold it all across the world. It was called the Fusion here in the U.S. But we were filming it and we decided to go to Christchurch. And we did an amazing ad. This is in China when our tagline was "Make Every Day Exciting." So it was a phenomenal ad that was done by our team in Asia, our advertising team. And we had a lot of fun with it. And it made me realize that I absolutely must come back to New Zealand because I didn't get enough of just seeing Christchurch. It was so beautiful. I want to see both the North and the South Island and really enjoy the full experience.
Oh, that's good. Around Christmas time is a really good time too because it's summer here, but even late January into early February is when we have some really, really good weather months. And so something you might want to think about. Or if you like skiing as well, we've got that as well. So it's pretty cool. You can go skiing, you can go swimming, you choose.
Well, I already have a master plan. I'm a huge tennis fan and I've been to Wimbledon, the French Open, and obviously the US Open. I have not been to the Australian Open. I've walked by Rod Laver Arena, but I have not actually attended an Australian Open. So my plan is to do Australia, New Zealand together with the Australian Open. I have it in a plan. I just need to now implement the plan.
That's good because the week before, maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the Australian Open opens, we have a competition here in New Zealand called the ASB Tennis Classic.
Okay.
And so some of those big top players come here and they play here first before they go into Australia. So like a little bit of a warm-up. So, yeah, you could do all of that and have fun as well. And, yeah, and then go and watch some tennis in Australia. That'll be pretty cool as well. And you know what? We've got electric vehicles here too. So you can utilize that as well.
I just signed. So, yeah, I know you do. And I think we're sending some Mustang Mach-E's there very soon as well.
Oh, wow. Maybe I should talk to you guys about getting a sponsorship with part of the podcast and then driving around a Ford vehicle here. That'd be pretty cool. There you go. Put you on the spot.
Anything possible.
That's cool. There you go, listeners. You heard it here live. It's all good. Sondra, the thing here I wanted to ask you was, you've got an extensive background. You said 25 years in the company and so forth, and it's been one company. I spent almost that amount as well into Hewlett-Packard and EDS before that, and it all became one company. But you get to do different kind of roles as well.
Right.
For you, how did you get into leadership?
Well, my first role in leadership within the company, I would say, I was applying for a role in what was then called Global Consumer Insights. I think we would call it marketing analytics today. And it was my first time applying for a supervisor role at Ford Motor Company. Very nervous. It was actually an interesting time within the company. And what I learned in that experience was how important it is to have mentors and advocates advocating for you, because my career is non-traditional. As I share it with you, my undergrad and grad are in mathematics. When I joined Ford, I actually did a stint in IT as well as product development and marketing plans and brand development. So I didn't take the traditional path. And then after I finished those three, I then went to Japan for 3 years and did a program management role. So when I came back and decided I wanted to be a marketer when I grew up, it was important to to have a few advocates and also support as I transitioned to marketing plan and to a global analytics role. And I was responsible for Asia Pacific. So I had an opportunity once again to support Australia, New Zealand, and all of Asia Pacific that Ford defined as the time, which included 13 countries. And so I traveled to about 7 or 8 of them, trying to make sure that we actually knew how our business was tracking. Quite honestly, we didn't have a brand tracking that was global in Asia Pacific, so I implemented one. We had GQRS, which was a quality survey, but we didn't have it in every market, so I added it to every market. And then we had customer viewpoint, which is a way for us to understand customer sentiment about our vehicles and our brand. And again, I had an opportunity to implement that across Asia Pacific. So from that perspective, I feel like I've been working with the teams in Australia and New Zealand for the last about 20 years. And so feels really good to hear your accent. You're hearing mine. You don't hear an accent, but I do. And it's one of my fondest memories is my boss, Nigel Harris, who was a great buddy of mine, an advocate, and who was also from New Zealand. And so it feels like coming home again to be on this podcast.
Steve, massive welcome to you.
Thank you very much for having me, mate. It's great to be on. I've just finished dinner, ran downstairs because we've got this one where I think pretty much exactly the opposite time zones at the minute.
Yeah, whereabouts are you in the world today?
So I'm living in the very north of Bavaria. I'm about 5-10 kilometers from the old east-west German border and been here for about 7 years here. I had 1 year in Berlin, but I've just been living in Europe and traveling around. Came for a 2-month holiday and I'm still here.
2-month holiday, wow. And I can imagine the listeners right now going, wait a sec, his accent sounds like he's Australian, is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So, no, grew up in Australia. I'm from a tiny town, from a dairy farm, a couple of hours north of Brisbane, and spent probably a good 10 years in Brisbane at university, and then met my wife, and then we had a house there for a while, and like I said, then we packed up and moved over to Europe for 2 months, and then turned into 6 months, 1 year, and we're still here.
Wow. And so I've given the listeners a little bit of an introduction to you. You're a professional freestyle motocross rider since 2004. Tell us more about your background.
Yeah, well, like I said, I grew up on a dairy farm, so motorbikes were just part of life. Got to chase the cows and get them in. And that was the reason why I didn't end up go racing. All I wanted to do was race motocross. There was a local motocross down at Dundarren. I used to go and watch the Australian motocross championships there. Always wanted to do it, but the cows have to be milked morning and night every day. So Dad said there was no chance to go, no chance, 1, to buy a bike, and 2, he definitely wasn't going to drive me there. So I just built jumps on the farm, and those jumps got bigger and bigger and bigger, and watched movies like The Crusty Demons of Dirt and things like that, where this explosion of this culture of action sports. That was mid-90s when that all came out, when I was a kid, and it just got bigger and better, and turned into a career somehow.
Yeah. And I understand that you're also, you do athlete events and marketing manager at Freestyle Motocross World Championship, and also you're an athlete manager at Invert Management. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, well, it's funny. It's good that you've got this leadership podcast. So I left high school. My dad always said, go get an education because there's no money on the farm. That is absolutely for certain. And I wanted to do a few different things, but I wanted to be a physio. I couldn't really do that just the way the school system was. I had to be in the top 1%, and that wasn't happening. So I backdoored a little bit. I did one diploma, advanced diploma in remedial therapies to go into physio, and I realized at the end of that, I was not interested in it. I was too sore to stand around. I didn't even have an interest anyway. And then Dad said, right, you've got 3 options then. You get a job in what you've just learned. No. You come back and milk cows for the rest of your life. No. Or 3, you go back to university. Right. Good idea. So then I thought, how do I want to live my life? That was the question I had the second time. When you leave school, it's like, what do I want to be? And nobody, unless you really know, most people don't actually know. And then I thought, well, how do I want to live my life? And I figured I'll have a lot of broken bones. It's hot in Australia all the time, especially in Brisbane. And I thought, well, when I'm 40 and I've got arthritis, all I will want to do is just sit down in an air-conditioned office. And I thought, who does that? Business people. And that was it. I went and did a business degree. But I didn't know what I was going to do in that business degree. I had no idea. And in that first year of university, you do, I think it was 8 different subjects, and then you choose your majors after that. And marketing, that was pretty easy. I went into the marketing lecture. It was pretty fun. It was like the fun part of business. Fine. So I chose that one. And I chose management. I don't know why. There was something about management that, I don't know, just tickled my fancy just that little bit. So I did the education and I enjoyed it, but I was not interested in working at all. I figured by the time I'd done 6.5, 7 years of university, I really wanted to ride my motorbike. And I thought, if I could live that long, like a university bum with not an awful lot of money, and you know what it's like to live university. So I thought, I'll try ride my motorbike for a living and I'll give myself 1 year. If I've done it for 6.5, I can do one more and actually enjoy it. And it worked out. From there, it was a couple of years down the line, things worked out very well. And a good friend of mine said to me one day, well, he said to me a lot actually, why don't I use those bloody degrees and diplomas that I'd spent 6.5 years on? And I thought, well, I'm not interested because riding's a full-time job. You've got to train, you've got to ride, you've got to compete, you've got to perform, everything that goes around it. And then in the end, I decided to do athlete management with 2 of the best. I didn't know at the time, and they didn't either. They would become 2 of the best riders in the world who were actually my friends as well. So it was just luck that it all fell into place. So that's how I got into the management side with athletes, and that's where I created my business in management. I managed to convince my wife to quit her job and her career to come and work with me and take all of the paperwork duties off of my desk so I could continue to ride and still continue to manage them, but then she would take over all the bits that I just had no time for. And so that was how invert management started.
Yeah.
The World Championships, I rode an event at the World Championships. I was doing their TV. I was a judge. I was helping them with their marketing. I was helping with their press releases because it's a German company, but they're doing World Championships. So I was reading their press releases as a fan, as a rider, and as somebody who speaks English as a first language. And so I just jumped in and gave them a hand. And fast forward 15 years, I had a great career, loved it. I loved performing all around the world, but I had a big crash. And the 2 owners of this event series, Night of the Jumps, it's called, who I had worked for and the reason I'd lived here now in Europe, they asked me if I'd like to work for them. And I said no. I said, thank you very much. It would be a dream job in 10 years' time, but I'm a rider. 6 months went down the line. I was still trying to learn to walk, and they asked me again if I'd like to work. And I said, thank you. Really appreciate the offer, but maybe in 10 years. And after 1 year, I finally learned to walk again, but I realized I probably wasn't riding professionally anymore.
Yeah.
So when they asked me the 3rd time, I didn't let that opportunity go this time. I thought they're not going to ask again. Yes, I will join. And it is a dream job, but it came 10 years earlier than I expected.
Wow. And tell me, when you say learn to walk again, was that true the accident you had and then you had to physically learn how to walk again?
Yeah. I did a show in Birmingham in England, and it was a 10-day motorcycle expo, and I'd done it 1 or 2 years prior, I think. And so I knew how the show went. For me, it was a very easy show, but it's draining. We're in a small arena. We do 2 or 3 shows a day, which is no problem. Getting up early, that part definitely I don't like. But the fumes from motorbikes, I think there was 6 or sometimes 7 of us in this small area. We're doing shows, and the fumes get to you by the end of the 10 days of shows. You're just absolutely exhausted. It feels like you've been carbon monoxide poisoned almost. Anyway, I got to day 8. I thought I was fine, and turns out I was just tired. I made a mistake, and I was doing a backflip. And the one trick when I'm doing this backflip is to reach down for where you sit. Where you sit on the bike, and we have a hole cut out under the seat. And so normally I would grab that. Unfortunately, I was doing this backflip. I missed the grab and I was just hanging upside down under the motorbike. And that was it. I couldn't get back on. So I had a rude awakening when I hit the ground.
Wow.
I managed to get up under a bit of duress. I just felt winded, but I got up, waved to the crowd. The crowd comes for the spectacle. And if there's a crash, it's always a little bit that bloodlust. I don't know. So I waved to the crowd. Yep, it was a bad crash, but I walked it off. It's okay. And turns out I broke my back in a couple of places. That part didn't matter. The broken back part was fine. What happened was I broke my hip, but I didn't know about it for another 6 weeks. So I walked on broken hip, which was just absolute agony, but they kept telling me it was fine. So I thought I was fine. I was about to come back. I was supposed to ride in 8 weeks and I could barely even stand up. And I thought, well, I was 2 weeks before this next tour to go back to England. And I was considering, do I get somebody to kickstart the bike? If somebody can start the bike, I can physically sit on it and I could probably do a flip. I could probably do a couple of small tricks. It'll be enough. It'll be fine. I can get the job done. Anyway, I found out I'd broken my hip and then that spiraled into finding out how bad the injury really was. And so I had an experimental surgery, thankfully finding a great surgeon in Germany. And so, yeah, I had to learn how to walk again. It took me about a year. So that's yeah. So that's what I mean. I was never planning to do what I do now. That was not on the cards. This came a lot faster than I thought.
Yeah. And I think that's actually pretty true for our listeners. Just look, you may not think, well, some people might be thinking, oh, I need to prepare for something or I'm not ready yet. And I don't think we are ever going to be ready for anything, right? So
no, exactly right. And I'd say that's the best gift that I have out of doing what I did. I think anybody who does any extreme sport or action sport, even if you go mountain bike riding or rock climbing or skydiving, where you have to face your mortality, and I had to do it every day, you don't take things for granted because anything can happen at any time. And I always prepared for that, but being prepared for it and going through it are still two very different things.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.